Hello and welcome, I'm Sean Fox, this is Made to Ramble, and today we are in Araluen Botanical Gardens in the Perth Hills. As nice a place as any to put this little fella through its paces. This is the Samyang / Rokinon 35mm f1.4 AF lens for the Sony Full Frame E Mount. Alright, so from here on in, all of the footage on this video will be taken with the 35mm Samyang, at least until we head back to my place and start checking out some of the photos. I'm planning to film all of this in autofocus with the Sony A7R II, which does raise one issue of note. While the A7R II does have phase detect autofocus, it's a few years old now, and the autofocus just isn't as confident as the newer Sony cameras. In order to limit the amount of pulsing that I get from the lens, I'll be setting the autofocus sensitivity to low, so it probably won't be quite as snappy as you might see on newer cameras. So do keep this in mind when judging the autofocus performance. Like many people, the first interchangeable lens camera that I ever owned was the Canon T2i, or the 550D as it's known in Australia. This was about as entry-level a DSLR camera as you'll find, but it was capable of 1080p video, albeit without autofocus. The first lenses that I bought were a less than impressive Tamron Super Zoom and, of course, the trusty old Canon Nifty 50. I quickly discovered that on a crop sensor, 50mm is a little closer to 75 or 80 in full frame terms, which is not all that ideal for general purpose videography. So the next lens that I invested in was a Rokinon manual focus lens, the 35mm f1.4, which pretty much lived on that camera. Now, since switching to Sony Full Frame, of course the 50mm 1.8 becomes a lot more useful for general videography and photography, of course, but I've never really owned anything since then that produced the kind of creamy, shallow depth of field that I used to get from the Rokinon. Anyway, let's see how this thing holds up. Alright, so we're back at my place where we can take a closer look at this lens. If it wasn't obvious in that last bit of video just before, the zooming there was done in post, one of the benefits of filming in 4K while delivering in 1080p. I filmed most of that on a tripod, so there wasn't a lot of movement in the shots, and being that I was filming mostly static subjects, I just added a little zoom and pan here and there. Anyway, this is not a zoom lens. So let's take a look at this thing. There are no buttons, no aperture ring, just a nice big focus ring, which feels reasonably smooth. But nothing special. It's a lens. Nothing to get aroused by. Bloody dog. You too. Now, let's take a look at a few photos now. You're not going to find any sharpness tests here. These are just a few photos that I've taken since buying the lens, just to give you some idea of what the lens is capable of. I really think this kind of lens is best wide open, so I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be pin sharp at 1.4, but at wide apertures, you can't really tell how sharp it is anyway because most of it is out of focus. All that said though, it's certainly not soft, and I have really enjoyed using this lens. So far, I'm impressed with the results. So what do you think? There are quite a few options now for the Sony E Mount at this focal length. Sony have a 35mm 2.8, a 1.8 and a 1.4. Sigma have a 1.4 and I believe it now a 1.2. Samyang have both this lens and a 2.8, and I believe they recently even just brought out a 40mm. We've certainly got options. Alright, so I think that's about all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. The next video that I'm putting out will be coming to you from the Ibera wetlands in Argentina, so keep an eye out for that one. There will be plenty of wildlife in that video. Until then, hit that like button, subscribe, don't forget the bell notification, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.